So welcome back. We look at that report into editorial interference at the South African Broadcasting Corporation by a commission. It's found that there was an abuse of power at the public broadcaster. This was used to terrorise staff, it says. The Commission's chairperson, Dr. Thloloe, detailed how the abuse of power resulted in the parastatal deflecting from its mandate and editorial policies. Thandi Smith, head of policy at Media Monitoring Africa, is here in the studio with me. Buisson, president of the Broadcasting, Electronic Media and Allied Workers Union, BEMAWU, is in our Pretoria studios. Thank you to you both for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Thandi, perhaps let me start with you. What do you make of the findings of this commission? Long awaited. Your thoughts?
Very much long awaited. But I think it's first and foremost, it's a very positive thing that we have the report. It's very positive that the report has been made public, finally. So that's we really welcome that. But, you know, looking at the findings and looking at the recommendations as well, we aren't surprised at what the report is saying. You know, it's things that we know and have other evidence around what has been happening at the institution over the last few years, and it's just for us. It's further evidence, sort of cementing what our research and discussions have shown. So it's not surprising, but it is a positive development.
So Mr. Thloloe was speaking to Stephen earlier on, and he repeated the charge that the abuse of power and authority here at the SABC was capricious, but he does refer to the individuals themselves as capricious. But I'm wondering, the acts themselves of abuse of power, can we call them erratic? Can we call them unexpected? What is your point of view?
Well, I think that what we saw was a very sort of specific period where there was systemic abuse of power. I think that it wasn't necessarily erratic. We didn't see it, you know, just springing up randomly all over the place. I think there was an often very deliberate, strategic direction of abuse of power by specific people, and specific people that have come out in the report as well. So, you know, I think that, you know, we can't say it was erratic. I think it was a deliberate strategy of editorial interference.
And Hannes, from your point of view, obviously as a union, having dealt with a lot of staff members, and if we're saying this abuse of power was used to terrorise staff and deflect them from carrying out the SABC mandate, Thandi here says it cannot be done without it being systemic in some way. And I'd again ask you, do you agree with the characterization of that as capricious?
Well, I think first of all, maybe it's an abuse of power, but of course the decisions were taken to protect the government of the day that was in office at that point in time, and that is the main concern. The issue around the abuse of power and the fear and all of that. The SABC 8, for instance, made a decision that they are going to stand up against this abuse of power, or the protection, at least, of the government of the day at that point in time. And we know what happened, what was the outcome of that particular case. So we believe that there is no excuse for anyone that was part of the system to now throw up hands in the air and say that I was scared, I had nowhere to go.
Okay, so let me just jump in there, Hannes. So firstly, you say we know that the decisions were taken to protect the government of the day, yet the commission report says that there was no evidence of direct interference of the governing party. So are you speaking from any other knowledge? Is this something that you're going to bring to the attention of the commission and recommend that there be action taken?
Well, there may be not evidence at this point in time of direct political interference, but why would the SABC or the decision makers at the time make those specific decisions, particularly in respect of the protest policy? That was to protect the government of the day against bad publicity, to stop viewers to see what exactly was going on in the country. So most certainly that was, there may not be at this point in time direct evidence in that respect, but we all know that that was the reason. Why else would that
and that's a very interesting point, Highness, and I want you, Thandi, to answer this in just a moment, because there is that on whose orders people were acting, right? So you say you know that that decision was taken obviously as a PR exercise for the government. But the more important question is, if we're talking about systemic problems, we've got to ask the question, are some of these decisions taken voluntarily by on the own volition of certain individuals who believe that they're doing the government of the day a favor, or is it something that is entrenched within the system at the SABC? And I think that's a very pivotal question that we need to ask. Kindness.
Well, it seems that the problem and we're not saying that this commission has not done a proper job, but it seems that there was not deep enough or thorough enough investigation in terms of exactly why the decision makers made those decisions at the time, and it is our view that it was done not out of own will and own voluntary, but that there was some influence from the outside to make those decisions.
All right. Thandi, I mean, the Commission does make findings on something such as the editorial policy, making recommendations on where, for instance, the upward referral should begin and end because of some of these happenings. A public broadcaster is by its nature not automatically insulated from political or governance influence or attempts at interference. So how do we insulate that and ensure that individuals who take it upon their own volition to act on behalf of said government or party don't get away with that?
Well, I want to speak to two sort of different things, but it speaks to the same, what you're asking. And the first is that when in our 2016 local government elections, as we did with our 2019 and as we have with every election period, we look at the coverage of the elections. And in 2016, it was the first time that we found biased coverage within the SABC. And it was biased coverage in favor of the ANC. And that speaks to the issue with, it's not necessarily a directive of going, you have to do this, but it's sort of that culture of favoring a particular political party, and in this case, the ruling party, and then that in itself is sort of that editorial shift and favoring, and you can take that as one case. And the other issue is around the powers of the minister, or the previous powers of the previous minister over the SABC senior executive. We were involved in a court case that has changed that dynamic. Previously, the minister had powers to appoint and remove senior executive members, senior executive positions at the SABC. It's how Thloloe Motsoeneng got into the position that he got into. And that is, we felt that was direct interference by a government official into the operations of the SABC.
And I mean, the report does speak about how executives gave instructions to people who actually had no authority to give those within the public broadcasters. So going forward from Media Monitoring Africa's perspective, how do you prevent that from happening? People with no authority interfering with the day-to-day runnings? Well,
it starts with an independent board making the right appointments to senior executives, which we are seeing happening at the moment. I think that we have seen good decision making. I think we have seen transparent and accountable decision making, which speaks to exactly that. Where the situation plays out is where you don't have transparent processes, where you aren't held accountable. You start getting this sort of the shaping of putting people in place that you want them to be in.
Highness, I need to ask this question because the report speaks about how staff operated in an atmosphere of fear, and you were saying that, for instance, certain people taking certain decisions can't then turn around and say they were doing it in fear of their jobs. But it has been found that even though management does not necessarily work in concert, individuals would make certain decisions that would then threaten their staff members. As a union, how do we prevent that? Because they're not all going to have the same approach or the same directive, but the atmosphere of fear remains.
Well, the thing, and history has shown us that the most effective way in dealing with kind of issues like this is to blow the whistle on this kind of conduct. And we know that earlier, not long ago, the current minister tried to interfere in the coverage of the SABC, and staff members were quick to report that. And I think on the one hand, yes, we have an independent board at this point in time, and we believe that they are doing a fairly good job at this point in time.
Very quickly, Hannes, just to end off, what about freelancers? Because as we've seen, they've borne quite a great deal of the brunt of these kind of things. They're not covered by HR processes or protected by it.
Well, they are unfortunately not, and we believe that they don't have less right than employees when it comes to these kind of issues. We believe that freelancers must unionize. They must get themselves a proper, strong union that's prepared to speak on their behalf, and they would have that same protection.
Thank you so much for speaking to us. Hannes Buisson, President of BEMAWU, Thandi Smith, Head of Policy at Media Monitoring Africa. Let's take a look at some of your comments on our question of the day. All right, so we're asking you, do you think the SABC is on the right track to protect its independence for the long term? So let's take a listen to some of your voice notes before we look at your tweets.
Hi, it's Titi Tobani. There is no way that the SABC can be independent because it's a public broadcaster, and the biggest funder of it is the government. However, the SABC need to report without fear or favor and prejudice.
I'm not convinced that the SABC is on the right track in terms of editorial independence and how it reports news, because we've seen many times SABC cutting feet, not covering other political parties, which clearly shows that they are being manipulated somewhere.
All right, do send us your views to #FullView. You can also send us your voice notes or video call us on +27 66 479 8056. You can view any of our interviews or features by going to sabcnews.com. And just to let you know that in news just in, the Democratic Alliance has said that it's going to lay criminal charges against former Communications Minister Faith Muthambi for political interference in the editorial policies of the SABC. Of course, we'll continue to follow up on that story.